If you've spent any amount of time around Yu-Gi-Oh players, you've probably noticed something strange. If you ask 10 different people when the game was at its best, you'll probably get 10 different answers. Some players swear by GOAT format, with its simpler rules and more back and forth resource management. Others will say Edison is the best, with just enough complexity and depth to make the game strategic without it being overwhelming. Some will say Hat format is the best, or Toss, and yes, believe it or not, some will even argue that modern Yu-Gi-Oh is the best the game has ever been. Any long-running game is bound to have players arguing that their favorite era is the best one. But the more I think about it, the more I think Yu-Gi-Oh specifically has something interesting going on here. There's no best era of Yu-Gi-Oh because players can't agree when during its history Yu-Gi-Oh was at its best. And why is it so hard for all these ex-players who quit at different points in the game's history to come back to Yu-Gi-Oh in the modern day? How can Konami make the game more approachable for all these players who quit at different points and have a different understanding of the game's current rule set? I might have an idea or two. Ask someone who played in 2005 why they love GOAT format so much, or someone who played when Synchros released, or XZs, even when Pendulums released. It's not surprising that all of these players are going to have a very different answer. The satisfaction that comes with learning an intricate combo and using different resources depending on the opponent's interruptions is very different than just mirror forcing your opponent's summon skull. These are still both fun, just in very different ways. This might sound crazy, but even for one of the most hated formats of all time, tier players still tell me how much they enjoyed resolving these giant chain links and showing their mastery of the game's rules to ensure the better player would always win. None of these players are wrong. None of them are remembering the game incorrectly. They're just remembering the time when they personally had the most fun with Yu-Gi-Oh! Some older players understandably feel like their favorite format is the last time Yu-Gi-Oh! Still felt like Yu-Gi-Oh! And although they may not agree with the direction the game has taken, they still find themselves invested enough to watch videos just like this one. And if you're still watching videos about Yu-Gi-Oh, it must mean something to you, right? Why else would you be here? Yeah, that's right, I'm talking directly to you now, James. That's really gonna freak some people out, isn't it? How about a subscribe while you're here, huh? And this is why it's so hard to convince people to come back to the modern game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has taken so many different shapes over such a long period of time, all these players have found something different to love or to hate along the way. There's no way to cater the modern game to all these ex-players if every ex-player has a different version of what they think Yu-Gi-Oh's ideal gameplay should look like. The game is so important to people in so many different ways that Konami isn't just competing with other TCGs on the market. They're competing with the memories that we've all attached to Yu-Gi-Oh at some point during its history. And that's about the hardest competition that exists. The complexity of modern Yu-Gi-Oh is a major obstacle for those looking to return to the game. But I don't think that alone tells the whole story on why people fail to reconnect with Yu-Gi-Oh! In my opinion, the much bigger issue is the fun that they remember from who knows how many years ago is not immediately visible when looking at Yu-Gi-Oh! Today. Every type of Yu-Gi-Oh! Player just wants a way to get back to what they think was the most fun way to play. And I think that's the key. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! May not recreate the exact same gameplay experience you remember, but I do think it can still provide the same level of discovery, self-expression, and satisfaction. The main problem is years and years of new mechanics and card design philosophies have made those qualities much harder to see without first investing the time and effort into understanding how the modern game works. After a long amount of time away from the game, the most common reaction from players is, what happened here? Everything is just 10-minute combos and infinite negates. How am I supposed to play at all if every card has 3 effects that activate in the hand, the graveyard, and even the banish pile? The turns are 20 minutes long, and I'm staring down 5 monsters with walls of text on them before I've even had the chance to play a single card. And I do understand that perspective. If you're a returning player, that reaction is completely reasonable. The game has changed an enormous amount, and it does very little to show you where to start if you are returning to the game. But it's important to remember these types of complaints have existed for basically as long as Yu-Gi-Oh! Has. Anyone who only played Starter Deck Yugi and Kaiba was horrified to return a few years later and see the power creep of cards like BLS. The introduction of Synchros also turned off plenty of players who tried to come back, since they were more complicated to summon and also more powerful than anything that came before them. You needed to use them if you wanted to win, and it also didn't help that they were very expensive at the time of their release. By the time XYZ arrived, it now meant that anyone coming back had 2 new summoning mechanics to learn, and most players just didn't want to bother. And I know this doesn't fully excuse how complicated modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Has become, but for the core player base, these were small incremental changes that were made over years and slowly evolved the gameplay into something fresh and new. For a returning player, it feels more like a laundry list of homework that you have to catch up on before you're even allowed to try to play the game anymore. So the problem isn't only that modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't show players the fun they remember when they try to come back. It actually does the opposite, and it just shows them a gigantic list of everything that has changed and is different now. And that is a huge problem. Because of this, learning modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not like learning other games. It's more like learning a language. First you learn one word, then another. You don't just read the dictionary from cover to cover and expect to be able to understand everything. You need the context and the experience of knowing how everything fits together. So you go out and you try and you make a lot of mistakes and you lose a lot of games. But before you know it, you have a full sentence or a basic combo. The important thing is you need the understanding of what's actually happening during a game and how that applies to the cards and the rules. Sitting a returning player down and explaining how to link summon and how to pendulum summon and all these other things that they may have missed in the years since they played the game is not the way to reintroduce someone to Yu-Gi-Oh! It's much, much more important that they get a feel for how the modern game plays. Seriously, if I see one more how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Video with normal summoning Beaver Warrior as the main talking point, I'm gonna crash out. So over time, with a little bit of effort and through passively gained experience and knowledge, you'll become fluent in the language of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! You need the experience that comes with time playing the actual game, not just a list of new rules that have been added. There's a reason Konami didn't just wake up one day and add 25 years worth of mechanics to the game all at once. Everyone started and stopped playing Yu-Gi-Oh! At different points, and I know when you start playing, you're not going to understand every single card and effect that's going off all in the beginning. But that's okay. At this point, if you learn one new thing from a game you play, that is winning. It's no wonder it's completely overwhelming to try to return to the game. These players are missing out on years of experience and knowledge that's gained slowly through just playing the game and practicing. And that is something you are not going to make up for by coming back and doing classroom-style rule quizzes. A board state can be completely incomprehensible to someone returning to the game after a decade away. But that same board can be easily digested by a player who's had years to slowly learn all the new cards and effects one by one as they release. And I know this can be frustrating and feel like it's intentionally designed to keep new and returning players out of the game forever. But that's not actually the case. This slow, accumulated change over time is actually what has kept Yu-Gi-Oh! Alive for so long. Fundamental changes to how players are able to approach the game are constantly being made, whether it's with synchros and XYZs, pendulums and links, or even just changes to the ban list and new card releases that reach into new design spaces. And although I do understand wanting to go back to the simpler days of T-set and pass, it's important to understand that every successful game needs to be able to grow and change. If Yu-Gi-Oh! Would have stayed the same as it was back in 2002, most people would have long since left it behind. New archetypes, new card types, new effects. These are all the things that keep Yu-Gi-Oh! Alive and keep players able to enjoy the game for decades after its release. like it or not. And I know that might be controversial. These are exactly the type of things people point to when they say Yu-Gi-Oh! Has lost its identity in the modern age. But it's really important that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is able to continue to evolve and grow and change if we want to be able to continue to play it for the many years to come. And developing and iterating on the gameplay is not a straightforward line. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has made some mistakes along the way. There's been cards that have been designed and are incredibly frustrating to play against, and there's been formats that have been bad for the overall health of the game. But writing off the entirety of Yu-Gi-Oh! Post 2006 just because one new extra deck mechanic is added, or there's one meta deck that's really frustrating, is incredibly dismissive. It feels like every new rule or mechanic that's added to modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Pushes it a little bit further into the future and towards the next big thing for the game. But at the same time, it pushes it further away from what an old school player thinks Yu-Gi-Oh! Should be. But what does that really mean? What should Yu-Gi-Oh! Be? I think this is exactly why Konami has such trouble trying to cater the modern game to this community of ex-players who just want to see Yu-Gi-Oh! Return to its roots. Because what are Yu-Gi-Oh!'s roots? The answer seems to be completely different for everyone you ask. Tons of players are leaving or entering the game all at different times. Formats continue to come and go with or without them. So how do you let all these players jump back in? What is the easiest way for Konami to cater the modern game to all these players who think Playground, Duel Monsters era Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the peak of TCG gameplay when you have just as many players who are reminiscing about their Elemental Hero deck or wind-ups or Performapals or whatever? Well, there is one underrepresented part of Yu-Gi-Oh! That I think Konami uses quite well to address this problem, and that is legacy support for older decks. It's not often brought up, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Is all about permanence. Cards from 25 years ago can theoretically always still matter. Just look at how we have entire archetypes now for cards like Mystical Space Typhoon and Call of the Haunted. And I think this element of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is often understated, but it's really, really important. Reused cards, characters, and mechanics help keep the fire alive for what made old Yu-Gi-Oh! So special, and it helps to connect different generations of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players to different eras of the game. Blue Eyes and Dark Magician are two of the most popular monsters from the original anime series, and as such, they continue to get new support every few years, so Konami has an easy deck to point to get old players back into the game. They've also been making smaller changes, like putting Yugi and Joey back on the cover of the most recent booster packs, so they're more recognizable for people who haven't been keeping up with the modern game. And although this may not sound like much, having the marketing around the game feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a huge step towards getting these older players to come back to playing the game. But just putting Yugi's face back on the pack isn't going to convince everyone. And I get that. You can still play your favorite historic Time Wizard format if that's what you find fun. But with everything I've said so far, I really think the modern game is worth giving a shot, especially if you haven't been able to try it within the last couple years. I mean it when I say this, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is really, really fun right now. Exactly like a new language, it's important to approach modern Yu-Gi-Oh! With a learning mentality. Don't try to win all your games, just try to understand what is happening. I always recommend learning Yu-Gi-Oh! With a friend in person so you can go as slow as you need to and ask questions along the way. Even just having them go through a basic combo with you asking what is happening is a great way to start learning the game. But I understand not everyone has that, and in that case, Master Duel can also be a good option. There are many solo mode storylines to play through now that are a great starting point for a new or returning player. You can take it as slow as you like, read all the cards, and build some experience in a very low stress environment, similar to doing puzzles in chess to learn the rules before you play an actual real game. If you want a full understanding of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And its rules, start with the solo modes to help you learn a deck. Then, once the combos and the way the cards all interact with each other starts to make sense to you, you can move on to real games with real people. That way, the modern card design themselves won't be as much of a shock to your system anymore since you've already gained a little bit of passive experience with them. And I know the cards you now play against will probably be different than the cards you were playing against in the solo mode, so you won't know what any of them do. but that's totally okay. Instead of just watching your opponent combo for 10 minutes and throwing your hands up in the air and saying, I don't understand, they did something crazy, I don't know what's going on, I give up. At this point, you should keep your learning mentality and just try to understand what's happening in the game as the cards are being played. Even still, maybe they're playing too fast and you can't quite keep up with all the reading, so you have to go into the replay and watch things back a bit slower. But there's no shame in that at all. If you learn something new, you're winning. You don't win by winning the game. That comes way later at this point. Giving yourself the opportunity to learn and understand the cards that are being played against you will give you a much smoother transition into the modern game. It's easy to look at an opponent's combo and just think it's completely unbeatable and not even try to find a weakness. But turn the tables and suddenly you'll find that there's a lot more nuance in the decision making than you might have thought when you were playing against it. My point is, if you want to come back to Yu-Gi-Oh!, that's awesome. I really think the modern game is a lot of fun right now. And I promise, whatever you found fun about Yu-Gi-Oh! In the past is still very much present in the modern game. You just have to take a little bit of time and effort to learn the new language before you're able to see it again. But at the end of the day, I know some players will always just genuinely prefer the older style of Yu-Gi-Oh!'s gameplay, and that's totally valid. This judgment, though, is also shaped by more than just the game design itself. It's also carrying these memories and experiences that we've attached in our mind to our favorite era of Yu-Gi-Oh! When we do these comparisons of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! To past formats, it's really difficult to separate the practical gameplay experience from the memories we created while we were playing it. It's a feeling we've all experienced when we stopped feeling like a beginner and we became fluent in the language of Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's a fluency that may not feel so important now that the game has changed so much, but I promise it's a feeling that can be recaptured with a little bit of time and effort. So what is the solution? Konami could reboot Yu-Gi-Oh! Starting tomorrow, a brand new GOAT format with tons of new cards, better balanced gameplay, 30 meta decks that are all equally powerful, and I'm sure some players would enjoy that. But it still wouldn't represent the ideal Yu-Gi-Oh! Experience for every single player. The reason Yu-Gi-Oh! Has had so many different best formats over its lifespan is because there's been so many new and unique changes to discover and play with as the game has evolved. And I don't think that's something that's ever really going to change. Every major update that pushed players away also at the same time became someone else's introduction to the game and let that new player experience their breakthrough Yu-Gi-Oh! Moment the same way you did all those years ago. The truth is, returning players who are able to give the modern game a shot are able to fall in love with Yu-Gi-Oh! In a brand new way. To them, this isn't some complicated version of a game that used to be more strategic or better or whatever. This is just Yu-Gi-Oh! As they know and love it. If nothing else, I want you to remember this. The next best era of Yu-Gi-Oh! For you starts on the day you're able to walk into your local card shop and duel. Thanks for watching.